This episode is brought to you by Meow Wolf Denver. Come creative, leave created. October is the Cosmic Howl at Meow Wolf Denver. Take our immersive experience and add a splash of strange enchantment with events, workshops, and other special surprises. Welcome spooky season with Adultiverse, Misfit Fete, only for the Grownly on October 2nd, featuring an artisan oddities market. Costumes are encouraged and you must be 21 or older. Learn more at meowwolf.com/cosmic-howl. That's meowwolf.com/cosmic-howl. This episode is brought to you by Pine Melon. Pine Melon is the farmer's market delivered right to your doorstep. But this isn't just any grocery delivery service. Pine Melon connects with local farmers, ranchers, and producers, meaning you're supporting local agriculture with every order. Save time and skip a grocery trip by ordering online now at pinemelon.com. Plus, if you use code CityCastDenver, you get $75 off your first delivery. Again, use code CityCastDenver to save $75 on your first grocery order at pinemelon.com.
Today on CityCast Denver, Scotland has the Loch Ness Monster, Florida has the skunk ape, and it feels like people see Bigfoot all over the place. But there's never been a cryptid just for Colorado. Or maybe there's been one lurking here all along. The researchers at History Colorado have been digging through the archives, and they've got a unique and very Colorado creature to introduce you to, the slide rock bolter. Today is Wednesday, September 18th. I'm Paul Karolyi, and here's what Denver's talking about. Lucy Snow, welcome to CityCast Denver.
Great, thanks for having me.
So Lucy, we're going to talk about this creature, a mythical beast, a mysterious, lost something that goes by the name of the slide rock bolter.
Yes, yeah, it's a local legend. You might call it the Colorado's cryptid. Cryptid is kind of just any sort of animal that hasn't been proven scientifically. Mm-hmm. And the slide rock bolter has been part of local legend in Colorado history really since the late 1800s.
Which I got to be honest, I was very surprised about because I had never heard of it. And I've been talking to people about it. People do not know this story.
Yeah, it's not a super well-known story. I mean, you hear about Bigfoot sightings in Colorado, you hear about UFO sightings and things like that, but the slide rock bolter is kind of a piece of history.
Well, we'll get into that stuff too, because that's
Definitely.
Really the meat of this conversation.
Absolutely.
But I think we actually need to start by just describing what this thing looks like, because it's weird. It's real weird.
It's kind of like Colorado's land whale in a way. It's this kind of big camouflage creature. And when you look at the popularity of the slide rock bolter story, it really starts in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. The first time that it was ever really recorded in print was a book by William Cox. It was titled The Fearsome Creatures of the Lumber Woods with a Few Desert and Mountain Beasts, which was published in 1910. And that's the first time you really see the slide rock bolter come up in writing.
So as a historian, this is the important thing to you. This is the source, the original source, so much as close as we can get, at least. And who was this William T. Cox?
Yeah, so William T. Cox, he was a forester. He was an early conservationist, really in more like the Pacific Northwest part of America. But he traveled around all of the United States in the creation of this book. He actually first published a few newspapers talking about the different sort of creatures, slide rock bolter, and other sort of like Bigfoot myths and things like that were coming out of the lumberjacks and miners of the area. But primarily, he was involved in conservation. And the kind of protection of natural resources in the United States as a whole. Like
he was an advocate for these things? Like,
he was.
Is that why he went around and getting stories?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was multiple reasons for it. I think he probably had, personal interest in the stories that were coming out of this time. But I think additionally, there was this kind of burgeoning interest in the wilderness that was coming in the early 1900s with the creation of the national parks.
Right.
And I think William Cox, in an effort to kind of motivate the public to get more interested in these areas, was kind of documenting the kind of stories and legends and just local feelings towards the natural areas.
And that brings us back to this story that he heard from lumberjacks in Colorado it's a land whale. That's how you've described it so far. But like, what is the story? Because all of these things have like a myth around them.
Totally.
What is the story that he heard from lumberjacks about this land whale?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so the legend kind of goes that the slide rock bolter is this massive camouflage land whale that uses a bisected hook at the end of its, sort of tail flipper to wait on the steep side of mountainsides, really like more than 45 degrees of incline.
So it's a whale.
Yes.
Hanging from rocks up on a mountainside, just sort of waiting.
Yes. But imagine it's camouflaged, right?
Okay.
So to the average unsuspecting tourist, you would just see the side of a mountain. So imagine, hey, let's say you're on the side of a mountain, maybe you're off trail somewhere like that, an untraveled part of the wilderness, and you start to hear and see signs of a landslide, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, despite any preparation you might have done, despite whatever you might do to get out of the landslide's way, it seems like the landslide is always just one step behind you. It's pretty much following you. There's nothing you can do to get out of its way. And the second that you kind of are about to be overtaken and you look behind you, you see eyes open up in the mountain and a giant mouth that's full of, these razor sharp teeth. And it's the last thing you see before you're, swallowed up and disappear forever.
So that's like when the whale like lets the hooks go or the spikes on its tail and it like slides down and gobbles you up.
So the whale kind of depends on the bolter kind of depends on the momentum of the mountain and its weight to come down like a landslide in many ways. But it kind of comes with this telltale sign of the loggers would come and describe maybe huge swaths of forest or huge maybe entire mining encampments that were just mowed down as if with a scythe. And maybe it showed signs of a landslide, but there was no landslide actually there, right?
There you go, slide rock bolter.
So it was the slide rock bolter.
Of course,
it just uses its momentum. It slides down the mountain. It uses all the momentum that it's picked up sliding down the mountain to eat everything in its path, decimate, and then it slides right back up again using that momentum and hooks onto the mountain and waits for its next victim. So
what a weird,
it's a wild story.
So wild.
This episode is brought to you by the What the Buff podcast. Are you sick and tired of getting your football analysis from a bunch of stuffy old men? What the Buff is the CU football podcast for the frat bros, the girlies, and the gays. It's hosted by sorority girl Adair, who comes in each week with 2 pages of stats, actual sports reporter Lincoln, who just learned what a pick six is last week, and token straight guy Trey, the only one who can actually throw a football. I trust the gays. Lincoln, that means you. Second, I trust the girlies. Third, I trust guys, I guess. Straight guys. I promise, these are the takes you want on Coach Prime and the whole Sanders family sports entertainment empire. Join the gang each week for their semi-expert and fully hilarious analysis of each game and the chaos that inevitably ensues. Find What the Buff on any of your favorite podcast listening platforms.
CityCast Denver is brought to you by Life Surge, a one-day live and in-person experience coming to Denver on Saturday, September 21st. Life Surge is where local Christians gather to learn about growing their financial impact. This all-day event starts at 8:30 a.m. and will feature nationally renowned speakers, musicians, and business leaders like Tim Tebow, the 2-time national football champion, Nick Vujicic, the world's #1 motivational speaker, Elizabeth Hasselbeck, TV personality and show host, pastor-author Craig Groeschel, and Marcus Lemonis, the star of CNBC's The Prophet. Music will be provided by the Grammy-nominated Christian worship collective Bethel Music. The Magnus Arena has known inspiration, but nothing like this. A Life Surge event is a must-see, and tickets are available exclusively at lifesurge.com/Denver. That's life, SURGE.com/Denver.
Doubters would say, sounds like these are landslides. But this story is interesting because these lumberjacks were telling it. And so it says something about that time and that place in Colorado. Mm-hmm. And, that's why I think this is interesting for you all at History Colorado to be looking into this, because this is a unique piece of Colorado history. So how do you think about it as a historian?
Yeah. I mean, I think from a historical perspective, when you look at these things, you really have to look at the context in which they're coming out. And, there's a simplistic sort of social sort of answer for these things. And then there's the more kind of whimsical answer as well. And I think both are interesting to pursue. But on the historical side, as historians, we always look to the public record and what is actually coming out of these stories. And that's where you kind of think about what might really be a sort of explanation for these huge disappearances, these swaths of forest that just get mowed down. And it really comes down to looking at the context of how people viewed Colorado's wilderness throughout the 1800s and how that was starting to change in the early 1900s.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So when you think about where the story comes from, miners, loggers, people who were working the land, working to extract its resources, right?
Sure.
During the 1800s, kind of in an effort to promote westward expansion, the U.S. government really didn't provide a lot of restrictions around what those extractive policies, extractive practices might look like. So one example would be mining, right? The waste from mining, the extent of strip mining, and the destruction of those areas really had no restriction around it. And the same was happening with logging at the time too. Huge swaths of forest could pretty much be claimed by a land prospector and extracted, kind of destroyed pretty much, and taken without really much documentation or any protection around, limitation around what was being destroyed or what was being extracted from these mountains.
So then what was changing? So like these lumberjacks, they're part of that industry, but then something's changing, and then there's a tourism element that's a part of this.
Yeah. So that was when we have this sort of societal shift. In the late 1800s, we have, Theodore Roosevelt was a huge proponent of protecting natural resources. And we have this sort of cultural shift from extraction to appreciation when it comes to natural resources, where not only as a government entity, was the United States motivated to protect our natural resources, from a place of, pride and seeing the impact that it was having on the environment, trying to prevent pollution and things like that. But additionally, there was also, in all cases, an opportunity for profit when it comes to the tourism industry in these places. And that was something that on an economic level, Colorado and many places were shifting towards, instead of logging and mining and very much extractive and wasteful practices towards these natural resources. Many of these areas on an economic level were shifting towards tourism and kind of the encouragement for people to come and visit and see these beautiful natural wonders of the world.
What a familiar tension that is.
Oh, it is.
I mean,
yes.
We were talking earlier, you grew up here in Colorado. I moved here. I totally get this, why these lumberjacks their livelihoods depend on the extractive economy that you're talking about. And then times are changing and more tourists are coming and maybe wanting to preserve those resources. I could see why they would want to create and tell some stories about a big monster that might gobble up tourists.
Certainly. Yeah, exactly. So when you look at it, I mean, if you want to take Occam's razor to this idea of, okay, well, who might be mowing down an entire swath of forest like it's been hit by a scythe? Might be loggers, might be the people who are creating this story themselves, right? And you look at, maybe this entire town has been destroyed. Well, the mining industry had huge booms and also had huge busts, so towns were abandoned really quickly.
Yeah.
And it also was just like indicative of that sort of wasteful lifestyle. So when the tourists sort of arrived, and this sentiment came to really see and appreciate the natural wonders of places like Colorado, it threatened the livelihood of loggers and miners and the people who had been here much longer than the new tourists. And it's even very common within the Slide Rock Bolter mythologies to bring up that the Slide Rock Bolter has a taste for tourists. He takes advantage of the tourists, a lack of experience on these trails, and would often, lie in wait for them specifically. There's one very kind of fun story around a forest guide who was kind of sick of the Slide Rock Bolter eating up all the tourists who were coming and bringing this economic opportunity in the area. So he set up a dummy tourist at the base of the Lizard Head Mountain, and he gave it a guidebook. He gave it like a hat and the whole sort of tourist stereotypical look.
Mm-hmm.
And he also filled it with dynamite. And the story goes that he successfully lured the bolter all the way down the mountain. It ate the dummy tourist, and he managed to explode it along with half the town of Rico, Colorado. So,
and this, I think you're quoting from, this is the story that William T. Cox told in his initial account of the stories he told. So we're going to put a link to that in our show notes so people can read some of the primary documents. But you got me interested about today because I'm thinking about the tension that we were talking about earlier, grew up in Leadville. I'm sure you grew up with people who are feeling this as well, this tension between like the extractive economy and the appreciation economy today. Mm-hmm. Do people in Leadville, do they talk about this Slide Rock Bolter? It seems as relevant now as it ever was.
I know, right? It's funny. Growing up in Leadville, it wasn't something that people kind of spoke about very commonly, like kind of as a jab, or anything like that. It's interesting because the Slide Rock Bolter has kind of fallen into a little bit of obscurity when it comes to popular culture. People don't know it super well. It is funny. In the 1950s, you actually see a boom when you look at the public record, my favorite thing.
Sure.
You see that we have a number of newspaper articles that came out like in the mid 1950s around, there's some very funny headlines around, it's called The Terror of Tourists. It's called Seen by High People was one headline that came up in the 50s. So fun. It's very tongue in cheek in a way. But it comes, in this time where there was, if you look at the historical context, in 1956, we had the damming of Glen Canyon, and we had a huge kind of rise of environmentalist sympathies in the western United States in Colorado. And at the same time, we see these newspapers come out where tourists are kind of warned against exploring the mountains and having the mountains to themselves because the Slide Rock Bolter might come and get them.
Fascinating.
Just you look at the correlation. Maybe there's a correlation, maybe there isn't, but I think it's an important thing to consider, as the Slide Rock Bolter is kind of a boogeyman to the tourists that are coming. Used
Absolutely.
as a boogeyman, yeah.
Absolutely. I could see it resonating with people today.
I
wonder how our listeners would feel about this. If this kind of like, if we need to keep telling the story of the Slide Rock Bolter to make sure we're not like, having too many tourists come and love our parks to death, or I don't know how people would feel about this now. I really want to know. I would love to hear what people think. Call in, let us know. Send us a text message with your name and neighborhood to 720-500-5418. Again, that's 720-500-5418. But Lucy, before you go, I wanted to ask you about one other thing, just a comparison, because like the big other, cryptid, like we were talking about, the people talk about here is Bigfoot. Like, sure. It's not uniquely Colorado the way the Slide Rock Bolter is, but it is popular here. Like, I heard recently that Colorado is apparently the number 3 state for Bigfoot sightings. Mm-hmm. What do you think that says about us, that we're also part of this Bigfoot phenomenon?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think any place that has quite a bit of public land and undeveloped wilderness, so to speak, is going to have some sort of interaction with these sort of cryptids like Bigfoot and aliens and things like that. And I think, when it comes to Bigfoot, I think Bigfoot is a really great story. And there's a couple of important contexts to always note when you're looking at things like Bigfoot. One is black bear sightings, and the
you're saying people who are reporting Bigfoot sightings might actually just be seeing black bears?
Well, if you look at Perhaps. Where black bears are commonly found in the United States, and you look at where Bigfoot sightings are commonly found in the United States, there is a bit of a correlation there.
Interesting.
So I mean, it's important to note they're bipedal and they walk on their heels, so it's very similar to humans' gait. And it can cause a lot of confusion. I think what's interesting about Bigfoot taking prevalence now versus the Slide Rock Bolter is, we also now live in an age where people can take videos whenever they want to. Bigfoot really kind of took the world by storm when we got the first sort of home amateur footage. So I think there is like a bit of a technological edge to people, having more access to public lands and exploring the woods more often with their cameras and their phones. And seeing something in the woods that they can't identify and having the opportunity really to capture it. And whether or not it is an undiscovered creature, a cryptid, Bigfoot, or if it is a misidentified black bear, that's not necessarily for me to say.
Or say someone who works at the Sasquatch Museum dressing up and trying to drum up business.
Oh, that is certainly an aspect.
Who could it be? What could be happening? We don't know. We don't know what's happening out there.
Yeah.
Another thought I have about the Bigfoot thing and like capturing Bigfoot on camera. It was easier after people had cameras and were in the wilderness. Makes me think about why people have not been reporting Slide Rock Bolter sightings. Is there any like story reason for why people aren't talking about this thing or seeing this thing anymore? There actually is a legend that's surrounding that. That again, it might be a little tongue in cheek towards the tourists, but the story goes that the kind of perpetual development in the mountains eventually drove out the Slide Rock Bolters to the plains areas of Colorado, where they eventually starved because they couldn't continue their usual hunting practices. So it seems like there is a sort of explanation for why the Slide Rock Bolter hasn't been seen again. That being said, it seems like he reappeared in the 1950s, so you never know what might happen. I'm very committed to bringing the Slide Rock Bolter back to popularity in Colorado, so you will see me kind of singing his praises. Heck yeah. Well, listeners, I gave you the phone number. If you ever see the Slide Rock Bolter, send us a picture. Send us your account. Send us your story. I want to hear it. You got the phone number. Send us your name and neighborhood. Lucy Snow, thank you so much for joining me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This was great.
History Colorado is celebrating the Slide Rock Bolter with an evening of strange and unusual tales from our state's fascinating history. It's the perfect way to kick off spooky season, and it's going down at the end of the month on September 27th. We'll put a link to learn more and buy tickets in the show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed the show, why not take a minute to tell an unsuspecting tourist about us, rate the show wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey Denver, and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you then. That's clear. The Slide Rock Bolters theme song, straight from YouTube. It's a little jazzy number. He always slides in on beat. Yeah, I don't think they need to stock the Slide Rock Bolter song on CD at History Colorado's gift shop. You were right about the plushie. The plushie we need.